Hi, everyone. Welcome to, is it a webinar? Is it a session? I don't really like either of those terms, but let me introduce myself first. My name is Rosalind and I lead the Wildheart Foundation. I work with Susan Issa and much of the ethos and the vision that bleeds through what we're going to talk about is coming from Susan. So we're here today to talk about this SEND white paper, which was published yesterday. And I think as a team and also as an individual, we're very aware that this paper has prompted a great deal of anxiety in parents and carers. I think it's also fair to say it's also prompted anxiety in teachers and school leaders and people who work in schools. And just so that it makes sense in terms of some of the things that I might say within this session, my background is in teaching. So I've got that lens through which to look through as well. So I think the anxiety for us possibly falls into several categories. There's the anxiety of not knowing what is going to happen. I think it's important to say from the offset that we are still in a consultation phase. And we will talk about that in a bit more detail within this session. I think there's also anxiety about this new tiered system that's being suggested. What does it mean for my child or my children? And I think the other thing to say is lots of us come to this exhausted because we have already had to fight many battles. And for some of us, I think there's also this re-traumatization in terms of concern that we're going to have to go through a process which is complex and long-winded. And I know from my experience of talking to parents and carers through the Wildheart Foundation that so many of you are so well read in terms of SEND law. And, I've even heard of families and, individuals within families, going on to actually become SEND lawyers, at the end of it all, because, we're forced to do so. So the things that have come up in terms of themes, in terms of questions that have come through our website are what actually are the changes that the government is proposing. I think there is a need for clarity in terms of what is being proposed, what's going to stay the same and what's going to change. We've had lots of questions about tiered support, so I'm going to deconstruct that a little bit. Lots of questions about whether or not our neurodistinct children are still going to get the support that they need. And lastly, what does this consultation period look like? Do I actually have a voice within this process? And if so, how do I make my voice heard? So let's start with thinking about what this proposal says will change and what it says will be different. Okay, so according to this white paper, this is what is going to stay the same. So children and young people still will have a legal right to SEND support, SEND special education needs and disability support. Education, health and care plans, EHCPs, will still exist. And I think there was talk at some point that they would be completely removed. They will still exist for children with only the highest needs. So that means that as parents and carers and schools actually, we can still request an EHCP needs assessment, which is the very beginning of the process of trying to secure an EHCP. And local authorities will still have to identify and support SEND. Appeal rights will remain if families disagree with decisions being made by a local authority. So that's what's going to stay the same. In terms of what's going to change, the white paper proposes that there is more support available for children and young people without an EHCP through a tiered support system, which we're going to talk about in a minute. There is proposed earlier help in mainstream schools, so needs are met sooner. Now, as a teacher or former teacher, I have to say that statement feels a little bit wishy-washy. I would like to drill down into what that actually means. There'll be clearer national standards, so support is more consistent across the country. And through my role working at the Wildheart Foundation, we deliver provision now across, I think, almost 20 different local authorities. And it's very clear that local authorities currently have quite a high degree of autonomy in terms of how provision is agreed upon and delivered. The government is proposing that there will be more consistency there. And again, that's an area that I would argue needs to be drilled down in terms of more detail for us. Bridget Phillipson, the Secretary of State for Education, has talked a lot about the fights that we have as parents and carers in order to secure support and provision for our SEND young people. And she has talked a lot about taking the fight out of that process for support. But obviously, that only becomes a reality if the support that is being promised actually becomes available through the changes suggested through this tiered support system. So, in terms of summarising that, because I'm very aware that that's a lot of information, EHCPs and legal rights to stay, but EHCPs only will be available for the highest need, with more earlier help available within schools without needing an EHCP plan. Before I move on to tiered support, I think it's important to say that these proposed changes are not due to happen until 2030. So we do have some slack. And once again, just to reiterate, we are still in this consultation period. So that's a summary of what will stay the same and what will change. The next area that I thought it would be helpful to talk about is this concept of tiered support. So within this white paper, it is proposing that there are 3 levels of tiered support. So tier 1, they have classified as universal support. And this is support for all children in mainstream settings. And really, this is about high quality teaching. When I used to teach, I don't know if it's called this, we called it quality first teaching. And we talked a lot about the fact that as teachers, we are all teachers of SEND. Tier 1 is about creating inclusive classroom environments, using reasonable adjustments. And one of the things that I love so much about Susan's view of reasonable adjustments is that any reasonable adjustment that we make within a learning environment is never only going to impact one child. It's always going to impact more than one child. And I think that's such a great statement to talk about in schools. The other thing that Susan talks about in relation to reasonable adjustments that I thought it would be interesting to share in this space is also this idea that the greatest reasonable adjustment is actually an adjustment of our mindsets. And that's been really helpful for me to think about as someone who spent a lot of time in schools and also as a parent myself. The tiered 1 support, which is quality first teaching, high quality teaching, however you want to frame it, would be something that is expected and rightly so within any school, mainstream school learning environment. So that's tier 1, universal support. Most children's needs should be met within this first tier. Then we've got tier 2, which is being framed as targeted support. So this is extra help for children who need more than universal provision. This might include small group interventions. It might include targeted speech and language support. It might include emotional support for young people, sometimes called EBSNA. Sometimes that's used in schools. It might include SEND support, but not with an EHCP. So this type of support is certainly already happening in schools that I've worked in. I've seen incredible EBSNA courses, emotional based learning opportunities for young people. I've seen amazing small group interventions. So another way of thinking about this is probably to think about children who are on a SEND register in school, but do not have an EHCP. So that's tier 2. And then we've got tier 3, which is framed as specialist support. And this is for children with complex or long-term needs. So specialist services are likely to be involved. There's likely to be multi-agency involvement. So as well as teaching and learning being a focus, there might be an ed psych involved, a SALT practitioner. Here, there would still be an expectation that that child or young person would have an EHCP. But this is now, from my understanding of the white paper, going to be only a small number of children who meet this threshold in terms of receiving this tier 3 specialist support. I would hazard a guess that this tiered support is going to create anxiety for parents and carers of SEND children and young people, and actually also for those working in schools, because the resources required in order to facilitate young people losing EHCPs potentially. Again, this is not anything that's going to come into fruition until 2030. We are still in a consultation period and being moved to tier 2. So the onus is going to fall on a lot of mainstream schools. And I know that the government has promised that there will be a budget. Off the top of my head, I recall they've said 200 million for schools. But when we spread that budget across all the schools in the UK, obviously that is a large number of schools. So the next bit that I thought would be interesting to talk about is the acronym ISP that has come into the white paper. It stands for Individual Support Plan. And an individual support plan may replace an EHCP for some young people who are deemed not to meet the tier 3 threshold. So if a child falls within tier 2, they may be offered an individual support plan. So in order to differentiate between an EHCP, an education healthcare plan, and an ISP, an individual support plan, I thought it might be helpful to deconstruct those two terms. So an EHCP is a legal document, and it is designed for children who have complex or long-term needs. It is a very detailed, legally enforceable support plan. And if a child has an EHCP, parents can appeal decisions and the support must be provided. It's a legal document. An ISP, an individual support plan, and again, just to stress, this is a proposal because we're still in the consultation phase. It is not a legal document, and I know that that is something that creates anxiety. It is for children who have additional needs but do not meet the EHCP threshold, that tier 3 support. It will include, or it's proposed to include, agreed support and reasonable adjustments, usually within that second tier of support. An ISP is not a legal document in the same way that an EHCP is, and there isn't a SEND tribunal route as there is currently with an EHCP. So in terms of a one-sentence summary, EHCPs are legally binding plans for the most complex needs. ISPs, individual support plans, are proposed support plans, but without the same legal protections. I'll take another breath. And again, I'm conscious that this is a lot of information. And if anyone would like me to share with them after this session my notes, they can email me. My email is rosalind@thewildways.org.uk. We can send that through the chat as well so that people have it. And I'm really happy to share the notes that I'm talking through in this session. So we're down to the third point that I thought it would be helpful to go through, given the questions that we've received at the Wildheart Foundation through our Wildways Facebook page. Will neurodistinct children still get support? So again, I thought it might be helpful to talk about what will stay the same and then what is proposed in terms of changes. So children with autism, ADHD, and other neurodistinct profiles will still have a right to support. Support is based on need, not diagnosis. This is such an important point that sometimes isn't properly communicated to parents and carers, in my experience. I'm going to say that again. Support is based on need, not diagnosis. Schools and local authorities will still be expected to identify needs and meet needs. And children with complex needs who meet that tier 3 threshold will still be eligible for an EHCP. In terms of what the white paper is proposing will change, eligibility thresholds, there's my own neurodiversity coming through there. Eligibility thresholds for EHCPs may rise, and I need to stress that word may, meaning fewer children may have access to an EHCP, and more children, if that were to happen, would receive support through the non-legally binding plans, the ISPs, the individual support plans. The intention here, which again, Bridget Phillipson has been stressing a lot through all the interviews that I've heard, is that this would take away the fight that many of us have had to go through in terms of trying to secure an EHCP for our children or child. Okay, the last thing that I wanted to just talk about before we look at any other questions that have come through is, what does this consultation period look like? And do I have a voice? The public consultation is run by the Department of Education, and it is an opportunity where anyone can give views in terms of the proposed SEND reforms. It is important to share that the government, as far as they're concerned, this is the listening stage, and that we can respond to the consultation both as individuals but also as a group. And certainly at the Wildheart Foundation, the Wild Ways, it's something that we plan to do so that we can share our voice within this consultation period. I was interested to think about, well, what will really influence change in terms of this white paper. And our view is that, the more people that respond to this consultation, the better. I would hazard a guess that the Department for Education will be looking for themes that are repeated. So, for example, concerns about legal protection, I think, may be a theme that is repeated. And I think any of us who are able to, who feel comfortable sharing specific examples in terms of the impact of these proposed changes on our children, on our families, on our communities, on our schools, if we're still working in education, I think could also have a really powerful impact. So what I'm going to do is just copy and paste the link that I found. I went into it earlier through the chat. And again, if you would like me to send any of the notes that I've been through today to you, I'm also going to put my email address through the chat as well, because as a dyslexic individual, I like to read as well as listen. It's much better for me. So I'm sending through my email address as well. Okay, that's everything that I wanted to share with you. Just to reiterate, we are here as an organisation. If you're not already a member of our Facebook page, please do join us, as well as offering educational support, mentoring, tutoring provision through the Wildheart Foundation. We also have our sister company, the Wild Ways, which offers support to families navigating raising neurodistinct young people. We also offer a range of training courses, both to parents and carers, but also to schools. Okay, thank you. We've just been asked a question about EOTAS and how it's going to impact EOTAS. The bottom line is without an EHCP, a young person isn't going to have that route through to EOTAS. So with the proposed smaller number of young people being awarded an EHCP, it will reduce the number of young people who are able to access EOTAS, which is obviously a great concern.
Yeah, thank you. It is a worry.
But just to reassure you, I know I keep repeating this, but we are still in the consultation phase. I think what we need to do now as a community of parents and carers of neurodivergent young people and, neurodivergent adults who went through the school system and, didn't have a diagnosis and didn't get the support that we needed and were sometimes disillusioned by how the education system made us feel without that support. I think now is the time for us to really mobilize our community as this, army of voices to share as much lived experience as we possibly can through this consultation, and hope that the government listens to what we share.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that teachers and school leaders and teaching assistants, should also share their concerns because, my experience of working in education for 20 years was that my job just kept getting bigger and harder every single year. And this feels like such a huge responsibility to delegate down to schools. I'm concerned about the fact that while £200 million sounds like so much money, when you spread that across the schools, that there are thousands of schools. I think Kelly and I have looked at the number of schools before in the country before, and that pot of money suddenly becomes small. The other concern that I've heard a lot through radio discussions about this is it's talking about specialist support in terms of SALT practitioners, speech and language therapists, and ed psychs, occupational therapists. We know that there are not enough of those professionals currently available to all the young people who need them. And we are going to have to, again, create an army of SALT practitioners and ed psychs and OTs. And that's got to happen quite quickly. I often worry about AI taking all of our jobs in the future. If you're an amazing young person now and you're thinking, what should I do that guarantees me a job? Go and train to be an ed psych or a SALT practitioner or an occupational therapist, perhaps because there are not enough of them available to us at the moment, in my experience. That's my rant over.
Thank you. Brilliant.
I'm just trying to think if there's anything else that I've heard that's really moved me. Well, I think, that one of the key themes that has come through is this really about, a generational opportunity to rethink how we support our STEM young people, or is this simply a money saving approach? And I'm just going to leave that out there.